what is up guys, my name is Oleg, this is Bond, welcome to the channel. In today's video I'm gonna talk about a vintage Russian watch that nobody else seems to talk about or even know about its existence. It's Chaika. I mean, Vostok watches are the talk of town, Amphibian, Komandirskie, that's all anyone talks about, and I'm guilty of that too because I love those watches. But of course there are other vintage Russian watches that are historically relevant, so let me review one of them. Let's get started. Alright, so here's the Russian made watch that we are going to talk about today. The name is Chaika, reference number is 465571. Now before I get into the review of this specific watch, let me give you a little bit of a history behind the brand. So Chaika originated in 1963. The direct translation of name Chaika to English would be seagull, so Chaika means seagull. Now the reason why they named the company Chaika, it's in honor of the very first female cosmonaut to do a space flight. Her name was Valeria Tereshkova, but her nickname was Chaika, and that's why the company was named Chaika. Now originally Chaika were only making female watches. Later on in the production they start making male watches as well, but in fact in Russia and in Ukraine, USSR, they are known primarily as a female watch manufacturer. In 2006 they have slimmed down their operation because the poor reviews and poor quality of the watches, and in 2009 they officially shut down Chaika as we know it. Now there is a different Chaika factory at the moment. They're not operating under the same company, just a similar name, and they're making gold watches, diamond covered watches, so much more high-end custom watches as opposed to these mass-produced everyday watches. So let's get into this watch specifically. Let's start with the dimensions of the watch. 36 millimeters in diameter, 8.5 millimeters thick. We have an 18 millimeter lug width, and it's about 43 millimeters from lug to lug. So it's a small watch by today's standards, but this watch was produced, I placed it around 1990s because of the style and because the research that I've done online. I don't know the exact year when this watch was manufactured, but somewhere around 1990s. This design actually originated in 1980s, but I know that this is not a 1980s watch because on the dial here it says made in Russia, but if it was made in 1980s it would have said made in USSR. Now as far as the design of this watch, you can tell that it's a everyday or a dress watch, and in fact a little personal story about Chaika watches, and the reason why I own one is because they are quite popular in Ukraine, in Russia, in former USSR countries. In fact, my grandpa and my grandma had Chaika watches. I remember them to this day, and I just couldn't resist to get one for myself. Now this watch here comes still on the original leather strap. In fact, it's a pretty good quality leather strap. It's even stamped with Chaika logo. Weird that the Chaika is written in English. I don't know why, but that's what it is. Here it says 18 millimeters and genuine leather, and in fact the leather bracelet stood the test of time fairly well. Now let me zoom in into this watch for a little bit of a closer look. All right, so taking a bit of a closer look at this watch here, first thing we see is this sunburst dial. It kind of has a golden champagne look, sunburst effect. It's quite nice. It's all the Arabic numerals are printed on, so nothing is applied. Here it says 17 stones or 17 jewels. That refers to the movement, and made in Russia, as I previously mentioned. At the top it says Chaika. One thing to note, there is no seconds hand, and I did not do an accuracy report on this watch, but from my research they're not very accurate at all, and I believe they're using their own in-house movement 17 joules, as I mentioned. Not sure what the power reserve is, but from my experience, it's not that great. I'm getting under 30 hours of power reserve. Now, let me show you what the hand winding sounds like. It's, of course, a hand wind movement, not an automatic. So as you can hear that, the hand winding sounds satisfying enough. It's not as satisfying as other Russian hand wind movements. Just to give you a reference here, I have a vintage Vostok. I will also do a review of this watch at some point, but just hear the difference. Now, to me, that sounds a lot more satisfying as opposed to this. But again, that's just a personal preference. All right, so for the case we have, I would imagine this is all alloy metal. It's not actual stainless steel. We have a bit of a brass ring here, very 90s, very 80s style. The crown is unsigned at the 3 o'clock position. Looking at the back of the watch, it's a screw down case back. The case back is all stainless steel. Very simple, just says the reference number of the watch, and that's it. And lastly, there is no loom. There's no loom applied to the hands or to any of the hour markings. And as far as the crystal goes, I believe it's an acrylic crystal. So why aren't these watches more popular? Why aren't they as popular as, let's say, Vostok watches are in the online watch collector community? Well, there are a few reasons, and the first and most obvious reason is the fact that they are no longer made because of the poor quality control and negative reviews for these watches. Now, these watches were made as kind of a worker watches for Russian people, so the quality of them was not the best, and that's why, in fact, in 2009 they closed down the factory. So of course that's not going to do great things for your watch brand reputation if your watches don't have very good quality, and if in fact they are no longer made and the parts to replace the movement, or if something breaks, are not easily available. Number 2 reason is actually the historical significance. I mean, how many of us actually know about Chaika watches outside of people that are living in Russia or former USSR countries? Not very many, and that's because they have no military historic significance. I mean, Vostok watches are known for their military history, for supplying watches to Russian military, and their amphibian line of watches is very historically relevant with the unique design of the case and the water resistance and how durable they are, versus these watches here have almost no historical significance other than the fact that we're worker watches for the Russian people. And lastly, the fact that they were primarily women watches, and let's face it, women are not as big of watch collectors as men are, and also these designs are a bit outdated. Again, if you look at eBay and you search these watches, you can see quite a few different examples of these designs, and they all seem very much of their time, and a lot of people would not be wearing them by today's standards of design, size, proportions, etc. So what is my opinion on this watch? Well, I think this watch is not of a great quality. In fact, if I didn't have the childhood memories about Chaika watches, I would never have had this watch in my collection. I think if you're looking for one of these watches, and they go for around, I think model like this would be around $50-60. I think you are either a vintage watch collector who has a vintage watch collection and likes Russian watches, or just somebody who collects Russian watches and don't have any Chaika examples in your collection. Other than that, I don't think they make a very good everyday watch by today's standards, and especially with $50 you can buy much better watches, either vintage or even brand new. So this is more of a novelty watch than anything else. And finally, here's what the watch looks like on my 7¼ inch wrist. As you can see, it wears fairly well, even though it is a bit of a smaller size. I still think it wears well even by today's standards. Just the overall finish and feel of the watch is not up to the standards of modern watches quality, or even some of the vintage watches. Alright my friends, so that was the review of a vintage Chaika watch. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something. If you did, click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel as I release new videos every Tuesday and every Friday. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you next time.